Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day. Hello and welcome back to the main event. We've moved on in our history of the Champions League to season 2001-2002, and the first of three parts is here. I'm Martin, your host as always, and I'm joined as always by my two friends. Adamski here, back from America, looking well. How are you?
I am good, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to getting into this one.
And from a hotel in Birmingham, not quite as interesting as Chicago, is David Edgar. David.
I don't want to annoy the Birmingham Tourist Board, but I'd say that's a fairly safe bet, yes. Great to be here and looking forward to having another chat about... It just seems every week now we're getting any players go, I loved him.
I
He
know.
was great.
Few of those this week, I can assure you. 0102, I'm actually going to start from the season before, just from the season before, May the 18th. I'll start with you, David, 2001, because Manchester United were stunned and the football world was stunned when Sir Alex Ferguson decided and announced that 0102 was going to be his last. He's going to finish up. His contract ran out then. This was going to be the end. Quite a few things going on in his head, David. He said in his book years later, wasn't sure if he could do it again, win that second European Cup, that magic of Barcelona that night. He found it hard to kind of go again. He wasn't impressed. He did a thing with Martin Edwards, who was obviously the chairman at the time, and someone had asked, "Look, what will you do if and when Alex decides to go?" He said, "Well, we don't want another Matt Busby situation," meaning Ferguson being a director, hanging about the club, interfering, unable to help himself, basically. And Ferguson wasn't really impressed with that. And this spectre of being a Busby, there too long, overstaying a welcome. And he was 60. He was going to be 60 on New Year's Eve of 2001. He just felt, you know what, 60's time. 60, you feel 60. My goodness, you feel old. 50, you feel you're just halfway there. And a kind of coalescence, really, of those three reasons made him decide enough was enough. That was his book, David. Anyone's watched the brilliant Amazon 3-part documentary on United 99 knows that it could well have ended that season as well. They were not overly happy with some of his other interests, especially horse racing. And my word, that interest in horse racing would have mammoth consequences for United down the years. But this was a shock.
Seismic, really was. I mean, it was enormous, and you just couldn't really... They had been the team of the 90s, Manchester United in England, in the way that Liverpool were the team of the 80s. And you just couldn't see a Manchester United really without him, because a successful one hadn't existed in my lifetime anyway. And he had been just so much the face of it. Yes, there were these wonderful players, but Alex Ferguson, to use one of your phrases, Martin, bestrode that club like a colossus. I don't think he ever quite felt valued enough. It's a running theme in his books, written at various stages of his careers. I don't think he ever...
I'll put it out there, David. I shall suggest that people that achieve greatness never ever feel that they've got enough love and enough praise. It's never enough, and it fuels that fire for more and more and more. Ferguson often gave the impression of getting up early just to be angry, practice being angry. he needed that, and he absolutely felt he wasn't given enough love.
Yeah, I think as well that the Hampden thing was huge, Martin, because it just seemed to be so perfect. And here is a man who has written his own scripts in the past. And I will sign off with victory at Hampden Park. I'll be my second European Cup at Scotland. Everything seemed to be pointing to that. But I get the impression, and I kind of got it at the time too, that I think he was looking for a little bit of love, a little bit of, right, let's see the reaction to this. And of course, he speaks about his wife saying, look, you're too young to do this. I don't want you in under my feet all day. But I do think that in the back of his mind, he's like, right, okay, let's see how they react to this. And I just remember as a supporter of a football fan, not a Manchester United supporter, it just feeling enormous and a real sense of, well, what comes next? A feeling that I remember very, very strongly when it was announced he actually was leaving. Remember 2013?
Yeah, 2013, yeah.
But that one was at least a bit more understandable because of his age. There hadn't been any indication that he was slowing down or he was unhealthy or he was bored.
Healthy, perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect. That wasn't an issue.
He hadn't looked like you thought, right, he's getting to the end. And I think we've even seen with some modern managers, Jurgen Klopp, you could look at him and you say, that there is a gentleman who looks knackered. This job is aging him. You can see that. But with Ferguson, I was shocked. There was this, well, what will follow? Wenger was, really in his pomp at this point. Will Arsenal come through now? And I had only grown up, Martin, with in the 80s, there was Liverpool. In the 90s, there was Manchester United. Will this be Arsenal's decade?
Yeah, exactly. What does the 2000s have in store? I mean, the Hampden thing, you're absolutely right. There was a piece, I'm sure it was in the Sunday Mail at the start of that season, writing this all out. He's going to go back and he's going to finish off with the Champions League against Real Madrid. Very nearly happened, of course, at Hampden, where he, as a boy, stood watching Real Madrid win the European Cup back in 1960, blah, 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 blah. And United, they faltered. They faltered a lot in the early part of that season. He says the players just weren't sharp enough. He was the man who kept everyone on their toes. The scouts and those guys just weren't looking. It wasn't fired up really. And it was Christmas Day, actually, he writes, that his wife and 3 boys basically said, this is silly. You need, and he was very close because I think when he went back to United to say, I've changed my mind, they were literally going to speak to Sven, who was the guru at the time, Adam, of new coaching because of the success he was having with England. 5-1 in Munich had happened by that point. And after the World Cup, he was going to go to United. Adam, they had spent money, which they only do every few years, on Ruud van Nistelrooy, who was supposed to come the summer before. He crunched his knee, and they waited. To be fair, they honoured the deal, and he came from PSV in the summer of 2001. And this weird signing of Seba Verón from Lazio, that, I mean, brilliant player, phenomenal player. Not sure where that was really going to fit in that United team. He sold Stam, which he probably the only sale that he admits is a mistake. But what he cannot find for love nor money is a goalkeeper. They've kind of, after Schmeichel left, they've kind of gone through them all, and it's been a bit of a disaster, really. Fabian Barthez, I think, currently holding kind of comical gloves at the moment. Your thoughts on that United kind of set up at that moment, especially Verón?
Yeah, it's one of those things, I guess, that showed the differences between Serie A and the Premier League at that time. I know everybody's advancing quite well, sports science, tactics, all that sort of stuff, but putting a player in there like Verón into a 4-4-2 British midfield, I think, is just never going to really work at that point. And I think that's one of those things that has to go as a black mark, I think, against Ferguson, because for me, if you're bringing in someone like that, who's one of the best centre midfielders in the world, but certainly in the most dominant league, then you need to be adapting. You can't just be throwing them in and saying, right, on you go, do what we want you to do rather than do what you do. So I think there's an element of that. Right player, wrong time, wrong movie, etc. For me, There's an interesting couple of crossovers though, because Capello, I was reading something earlier on. Capello was quite heavily linked as well, wasn't he? With with the job, and there was all sorts of
Everyone,
chat
we
about.
said last week, Adam, at Hitsfield for years was because David has rightly said what's next. The press have been asking what's next for a while, because even by 2001, Adam, someone being in a job for 14 years at this point, 15 years. I mean, this is now becoming odd. It's becoming unheard of. Who is going to be next? And yeah, everyone was getting quoted, but Sven was very much down the line.
Do you know the thing that annoys me about that is what's coming next. No one seems to do anything about it. Like in these in these situations, we've had the same things before with Smith leaving. I know it's different because we had Advocate coming in, but for Ferguson, what's coming next? We're not sure. And you mentioned there everybody was beholden to him. I think that's fine, but it's tricky when you're in it. And it was the same the way that it went with Wenger at the end. But it really needs someone there to say, well, this isn't lasting forever. We can't all rely on this one guy to do everything. And we see it now as well. We're desperate at Rangers for a manager to come in and just restructure the whole club. I know Gerrard moved it forward and did all that sort of stuff, and everybody was beholden to him. We've seen some things there that maybe they shouldn't have been. Maybe we should have sold players. Maybe this should have happened. Maybe that should have happened. And I just don't think it's healthy. But it's just so tricky when you're in the middle of such ridiculous success to have somebody there to go, hang on a minute, should we think about succession planning here? Should we think maybe we don't spend that amount of money on this player? Yeah.
See on that, Adam, I think that when clubs say, oh, we're aware that at any point a manager, if it's a smaller club, a manager could be taken away, so we plan for the future. No, you don't. You clearly don't. That's a lie. It's one of the biggest lies in football. I would point at Manchester United's post-Ferguson thing. They had the idea to go for Moyes. It was wrong. A year later, they have missed the boat on a couple of managers who have gone elsewhere that summer. They're left with getting Louis van Gaal. Now, Louis van Gaal, great manager, but at that time shouldn't have been anywhere near the Manchester United job. A couple of years later, they have to go for Jose Mourinho. Well, that's completely different from what you went for 2 years ago with Louis van Gaal. And I think that there is this sort of myth that clubs say, right, we know exactly what we want. How often do a club bring in somebody who is tactically really similar to, in Britain anyway? Maybe abroad they do it a wee bit more, where tactics are discussed a wee bit more openly and whatnot. But a lot of the time in Britain, the qualification for bringing in a new coach was he successful? And if the answer is yes, people don't look deeper and say, like bringing in Moyes was hired because Ferguson liked him and he was Scottish.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Brighton of the club.
Yeah, the football.
We need continuity. We need the same kind of manager, because this is how we are. This is our identity. We are never going to be challenging for this, and this. But we do not want to be yo-yoing around leagues. We don't want to be in utter financial meltdown. This is who we're going to be, and there'll be slight difference between Potter and De Zerbi, but it's the same. It's the same kind of pathway. And but you're absolutely right, David. Big clubs are they're defined by trophies, so that's the only thing that matters. I mean, all of this is just marketing.
You're right, because there's nobody sitting. I mean, there's nobody sitting doing it there anyway, because he'd obviously run the full show for, well, at this point, what we are, 16 years. 16 years he's been there. But when was that FA Cup that he could have got sacked? Like 89-ish? 1990. So from then on, so 10, 12 years of basically, I'm the man. I guess it is just one of those things. Everybody just says, right, well, he'll deal with it, and then he goes and picks somebody who, I mean, you can be the best coach in the world, and you can be the best manager, and you can get players in a room and get them to play for you, but it doesn't mean you know how to pick your successor. It doesn't mean you know how good another manager is, or how you can know how to beat another manager, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to get another manager to come in and be successful at your club. It's one of those things that there's just so many variables about. So yeah, I think it's just dangerous. And again, it just amuses me how multi-billion-dollar football clubs leave these decisions to just the randomness of one guy who's hot this summer. One guy who might know this and who might know that. But Martin, I think you're spot on at those levels. It's just who can just, certainly for Man United in the last 10 years, who is the person here right now that we think we can win a title with? It doesn't matter
Tomorrow,
what
I'll
the
do
players
something
are.
tomorrow. But yeah, I don't want to get absolutely derailed here, but your point, Adam, I can't believe multi-million-pound businesses work like this. And of course that jars because they are multi-million-pound businesses. But other multi-million-pound businesses, the real ones out of sport, no prizes. You just have to be in. You just have to be a brand leader. You have to have a market share. You have to be kind of, being part of the top gang is kind of good enough. And that's where I made a remark years ago about Arsenal, who would never sack Wenger and who were all, picking up the top fourth trophy and stuff. But they almost kind of looked at themselves exactly that. I said, well, we're in the Champions League every year. We're a high-performing business. This is always kind of where modern football goes. If you win a trophy now and again, then that's a great night out. But that's where football obviously kind of disappears. The United thing, that first half of the season until he changes his mind and they really do kick on. Don't win anything this season, but we'll get into how different they look next week and the week after. It's just a mental start to this season. This is the 3-0 down at White Hart Lane. And it's not quite as simple as lads at Spurs, but it's lads, get the first goal, an early goal in the second half, and you just see how they respond. And they did. And, well, we saw how Spurs responded. United ended up winning 5-3. They're not brilliant in this Champions League group, guys. And with Deportivo La Coruña, Lille and Olympiacos, they go through in second place, but there's some scabby when they beat Lille at home. David Beckham scores in the last minute. Depor beat them home and away. There's, maybe the start. I mean, we've talked about this before. I think the big clubs, cool, we'll be there. We'll get through. It's just the opening phase. We're finding our feet, blah, blah, blah. Nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. But United and Depor go through. We'll talk about them again next week. Let's, Adam, before we do talk about some of the other groups, Rangers and Parma, maybe the biggest ones to miss out. Ajax as well, sadly, for other reasons on the other side of that coin. What, Parma now in decline? I'll do.
Yeah, I would say so. I think this something we'll come on to maybe later in this show or in the next shows. I think we'd mentioned a couple of years ago, preempting the whole financial collapse. The rise of the Premier League obviously is a big thing with that, but then also terrible decisions by Italian clubs and mortgaging their players and co-ownerships and co-loans and all that sort of stuff, hedging their bets on things. I think we're definitely starting to see that just now. So yeah, I would agree with you. They're definitely not who they were. At this point, we're starting to see Juventus coming back into it, and what they're doing is they're hoovering up these players. Effectively, you've got Thuram and Buffon going there. You've got Nedved and Salas going there. Essentially, cherry picking the best two players from the best two teams of the 4 or 5 years before. So it's one of those things. It's a cynical business, but I think that's the thing. Juventus obviously had the muscle at that point, legally or illegally, had the muscle at that point to be able to do that. And I think the clubs then got good money for those players, but don't do a very good job of reinvesting it. And it is just a cycle that comes in. You know what it's like. Then you're chasing it again and chasing it again and chasing it again. So yeah, I think they're definitely, the general league is in a downturn at this point, but I think definitely Parma. Yeah.
I want to give a wee shout out to Juventus though for the transfer dealings, which over the years can be erratic. They go through spells. They spent 32 million on Gianluigi Buffon, and the reaction around the world wasn't just in the UK, was 32 million pounds for a goalkeeper. That is ludicrous. If you can find me 5 Juventus fans out there today who don't think he was worth every single penny of that, well done. Because they were in one of those spells. Adam's right about, what do we need? Let's get them. We're not in any way bothered. And I think that's a club that's at the real height of its confidence and its transfer strategy, when it's, what do we need? We'll get them. We're not really bothered about outside noise or whatever. We'll just get the ones that we want. And the guys they picked up, as Adam mentioned, they're high-performing players. from almost distressed sale clubs, really, where we've got a knockdown price thing going on here. It's such sensible business, and of course you see the fruits of that enabling them over the next couple of years to be a contender again.
Obviously, they sold Zidane and they sold Inzaghi as well, but it didn't quite go to paying it, so they ended up obviously probably double their money, but it wasn't just a full on assault, I guess. But yeah.
Group A, Anderlecht and Lokomotiv Moscow are the also rans. Real Madrid looking great again, 13 points, looking good. Roma, the other club in that that group, they end up second. Very interested in your thoughts on them. I loved Roma at this time. They won the league the season before. Fair to say, I think even then everyone knew, even though that was Scudetto in Rome 2 seasons in a row, because Lazio had won the season before, that this wasn't the start of some kind of central dominance. You know where the gravity and the sources of power in that league are. In terms of, there's loads of players coming in and out, but that summer Nakata going to Parma, I think. Cassano coming in from Bari. Probably the two maybe most interesting one. I think Jonathan Zabina came in as well. I quite like Jonathan Zabina. Your thoughts on that team and how this Capello team looked compared to the Capello teams that we've talked about on the show nearly 10 years ago, in terms of the actual span of time that we're looking at, how he's developed as a manager? Because they're second in Serie A this season. They won the Super Cup as well. It's not exactly a dreadful season for them, but clearly they had their high point winning the title.
Yeah, so I think obviously we need to talk about the year before when they were terrific to sort of set it up. But just on that title race, that was wild. That was the year where Cooper was at Inter now. Obviously, we spoke about him. They were first on the last day of the season, and they ended up finishing third. Juve went in second. They won the game relatively comfortably. Trezeguet scored twice, put them up early doors. He had a brilliant season. Him and Dario Hubner finished top goal scorers, 24 goals each. Inter then scored to go back top, and then conceded, and then scored again, and then conceded, all before half time. So they were top, third, top, and back to third. They eventually lost 4-2. They were playing Lazio. They lost 4-2 away. Cassano, you mentioned, scored as Roma beat Torino to go second. So it went from Inter being first to Inter being third, Juve being second to Juve being first, and Roma going to be third to second that season that we're talking about just now. But the season before, I think, is the big one, isn't it? That's the one for Roma, where obviously they win the Scudetto. So I think, to talk about Capello then, I think his big difference from Milan was that adaptability. Remember we spoke when he came in and he tweaked at Milan. He tweaked a couple of things from Saki in his first season, and they were really, really good. Then they were hard to beat, and then they were so hard to beat that they couldn't really score goals, and he sort of tweaked things. But with this one, it was more of a big shake-up. You didn't need to change too much at Milan, I guess. It wasn't hugely the case with Roma. So he had his first season playing 4-4-2. Was absolutely fine, but it was that second season when they won the league that he moved to the three at the back. He brought in Walter Samuel. Aldair was sitting in the middle. Jonathan Sabina on the right-hand side as that back three. Cafu, Vincent Candela were the wing-backs, and then you had two proper centre mids, and they had quite a few of them that were just like proper centre midfielders. They had Emerson, they had Tomasi, they had Marco Assunção, who I loved as well. Just a really solid.
They had two coming through called De Rossi and Aquilani, which wasn't bad, eh?
Absolutely. I know. I think this might have been De Rossi's debut season. I can't remember.
Yeah, both of them make their debut this season, and I don't think anybody knew that they were. Funnily enough, Aquilani was the one that,
remember that,
he was called the Prince of Rome, and he'd been from Italy under 15s and through but he kind of got lost after that disastrous spell at Liverpool.
I think that's the thing with them. Like, they had them, and then the season that we're talking about, they bring in Cassano as well. So you're thinking, right, well, they could be well set up here. They've got three midfielders there. or two midfielders and a number 10 who are teenagers at this point, they could relatively be well set up, but then just poor decisions, like you said, managers getting sacked, all that sort of stuff goes against them. But yeah, this season before that, they'd moved to that back three. Samuel and Zabina were quite innovative at this time, I guess, because that was a back three, but they were pretty comfortable going wide and comfortable defending one-on-one in the wider areas. Cafu and Candela were bombing up and down the wings. Batistuta, his first year, Capello's second year, had a great season, 21 goals. Again, obviously a great signing, but it's actually a shock for me when you look back at it and you think they signed Batistuta when he was 31 and he cost nearly 40 million euros in 2001 or 2000, sorry, and you're
2000, yeah, it was just after the Euros, but
they were desperate to win.
It was to win the title, and I can't. This isn't hindsight. I remember Channel 4 still had a Football Italia magazine that came out. I think it even outlived their TV deal. And the thought was, this is a game changer for Roma. This signing, they can do this year, and of course they did.
It was a
huge, but again, an insight into what you and David have been talking about with Serie A around this time. The money's now becoming obscene for the purpose, and it's not Buffon, which is huge money for a goalkeeper, but absolutely paid every bit back. Just before we move on from Roma, Adam, within that system, and Capello's obviously a very system man, anywhere very just it's his way the highway. Yet you have Mr. Roma there, who is that team, and Francesco Totti, and he's just wonderful. I mean, how does he fit in? Because they seem to get the best out of one another. I'm doing another series at the minute on USA 94, and Saki and Baggio do not get the best out of one another, even though they end up, a hair's breadth from winning the World Cup. But you know what I mean? There's tension there. I think Capello and Totti got on reasonably well. He seemed to work around him or work that system around him, because he's the heartbeat of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably the key thing. We can talk about Batistuta coming in and being the cherry on the cake, if you like. But he went from playing a 4-4-2 in his first season to a 3-4-1-2. I guess in the title winning season and this season, Totti in that number 10 role. He had Del Vecchio next to Batistuta. I like Del Vecchio. I think before Batistuta came in, Del Vecchio and Montella were kicking about. He thought he didn't have a world-class striker, like you said. There was a lot of chat about Van Nistelrooy, which I hadn't realised as well before he went to United. Remember, it was the year before when he got he was doing the medical, and then he did his cruciate ligament, etc. He was kind of rumoured around about that time before they went for Batistuta, which would have been an interesting one if it had came off. But they had that front three: Del Vecchio or Montella, Batistuta, and then Totti in behind, which is fantastic. As we've spoken about with some of the other teams, maybe like a Juventus or whatever, it was very much at least 5 defenders, if you like, the back three, and then those 2 central midfielders that were sitting in their structure, and then you the pace from the wide areas, and then that 3 in the middle. Kind of reminds me of maybe some of the Juventus teams that we were speaking about from the 90s. So fantastic. I thought Totti was terrific this season. Really pleased that he got one. He got one relatively early, I guess, in his career. It's just a shame for me that he didn't go in and get another one, because I thought he was a fantastic player. Just really, really talented. I guess a different kind of number 10, and that's something we've spoken about a lot, and it's still going on now. At this stage, just those different ones. We're going to speak about even Michael Ballack and Yildirim Bastard later on in the games. There's just, we talk about a number 10 and people just think of it as a Maradona. We spoke about Aymar, we spoke about Riquelme last week. There's just so many different flavours of it, and I think Totti adds another one in there. It's just such a great season for him, and for Roma as a whole. The year before, obviously, what we're talking about now is 2001, 2002, which again, another theme for us on here is they have a great domestic season and they come into Europe and it's a wee bit of a damp squib, if you like, compared to what they achieving. But yeah, I think this was a really, really good team. And one thing that I hadn't really realised, it's kind of obvious now, and probably be obvious to you guys, but Panucci joined them this season, and he followed them about everywhere.
Capello
he loved him.
He loved him.
Yeah,
And
Capello. It was one of his.
Even when he was at Russia as the coach, the international coach, Panucci was there as assistant manager. Like 10 years, 20 years later.
If I was going to a new podcast, I'd take you too.
That's true.
Panucci, I'm sure, was part of an Italy squad. He was the only player playing outside of Italy because he was at Real.
Right, yeah, I remember
that. And he was allowed because there was a time if you left Serie A, you don't get capped. I mean, that was kind of the rule.
Remember, See, one thing about this period. Sorry, Martin. One thing about this period, just to pick up on something that Adam said there. I really kind of get the feeling, and this was not as apparent to me at the time, and this is a hindsight thing, but having done the first 8-9 years in the 90s, things are changing a bit in terms of style of football, but a lot of teams are still wedded to essentially 4-4-2 or 3-5-2 with 3 at the back. And then you get a team like Ajax come along and we all go, this is wizardry that only the Dutch could possibly understand. I think now, though, here we're starting to see teams saying, what if we do this? What if we sign 2 or 3 players who can do this? And you start to see things like, 3-man midfield to block it. Ferguson's trying it, isn't he? That's what Verón's there for. Suddenly, I don't know if it's this post-millennial freedom to experiment thing, but I just feel that looking at this season, I noticed a lot of clubs are doing different things that we just really hadn't seen other than the basic templates.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. There's a shift, definitely. And I think it is. We've had where were we when we were talking about Sosa, Deschamps, Zidane 5 or 6 years before this? Maybe 7, and that was, remember we were talking about the midfield threes coming in and being quite solid, but quite a lot of teams were still playing back threes. This now feels like the shift away from back three for, I can't remember off the top of my head how many years it would have been, but certainly for most of the 2000s, probably into the mid 2010s, I think there's that shift away, even at international level.
I was going to ask that, Adam. Just it'd be interesting to see at the World Cup in Japan and Korea how many threes are being used.
I think it's just died out. Maybe that's the last stand of it. We can pick up on that one in one of the future shows, but I think it's probably just about died out. But I think it's kind of what you mentioned there, David. You're now seeing 4-2-3-1 becoming more dominant. So you've then got, think about it logically, you've then got wider attackers playing in a space where there is lots of space because the back three are in the middle. The back three are then 3-on-3 now. So the wing backs are now having to become defensive because they need to deal with the 3 attackers, which then leaves space in the middle for the team playing the 4 to dominate. And it's just all about that overload, taking advantage of spaces that no one has took advantage of before. So I think you're right. There's definitely that shift here. I always remember 4-2-3-1 kind of just starting to come into vogue here, or certainly looking at lone strikers and front threes and all that sort of stuff. So it's definitely funny how a team changes how they play, and now I think quite a lot of people copy it, but back then, because it was also new, people were then trying to think about how they combat it or how they deal with it. In that kind of countering way, yeah.
Just on Totti, I loved him, and I love this Roma team. I had hopes for them, but they, as you said, Adam, they get through this group, but not much beyond. He needed to move. He needed to move away to another club to get more medals, basically. But I'm not sure he would say he had any regrets. As I said, he is absolutely at the heart of that football club. Group B has some old friends in the show: Borussia Dortmund, Dynamo Kiev. Dynamo Kiev would be bottom. Borussia Dortmund would go through to the UEFA Cup and not through to the next round because Boavista took second. And at the top of this group, Davey, is Liverpool. First time we've welcomed them, I think, into the Champions League. So synonymous with the old European Cup, of course. Like Roma, Davey, they had a fantastic 2001.
Yes.
Cups galore, League Cup won pretty easily, FA Cup won, stolen, grabbed, snatched, whatever you want to call it, by Michael Owen in injury time, 2 goals in no time against Arsenal in Cardiff. The UEFA Cup against Alaves, crazy, wild game, 5-4 in extra time or something like Gary Mack's weird free kick, whatever. And what people kind of called the quadruple, which means getting into the top four, because the first time they'd managed it, I think the last week of the season, to get back into this position, a cup they know very, very well. And again, as a neutral viewer, here's a name that should be there. And again, this tournament just adding more baubles to it.
Yeah, I think that there was a real sense of here was a club that deserved to be in that royalty category with all they'd achieved in the past. It is odd to think on now, though, 20 years later, with all Liverpool have subsequently achieved in the Champions League, that they weren't in it all those years, isn't it?
Well, they weren't making it in the league. They couldn't get there for no reason.
They couldn't get there. But this is, as we mentioned, the period of Manchester United. There was Newcastle, then there was Arsenal. So Liverpool had struggled to get in. I felt they were equipped for a good run at this. You mentioned there, Martin, this is not any great insight on young David's part. They were a cup team. And I looked at that group beforehand and thought, like most people did, I know who's going to go through that. And I was wrong. But Boavista were kind of shock troops in this group. They had a really good couple of years this period, Boavista, like really challenging up at the top end and threatening to sort of beat that the three clubs that are always competing at the top in Portugal. But I just felt Liverpool with their European experience, with the way they played, they had a good tactician in Gerard Houllier who could set them up for these matches. I thought they could have, I don't think they could win it, but I thought they could have a serious done at it. And again, we've spoken about this, that there are some clubs where the aura can carry you into a competition with more confidence than certain other clubs. For Liverpool, it's not a case of, wow, it's great to be here. It's a case of, right, we should be here. We can win this. If we're in this, we can win it. And, you just need to look at their success over, they'll win it within, 3 years, and with a team that had no right whatsoever to be winning a European trophy. But I just thought they were well set. They had a good blend of experience. The one thing about this Liverpool team is I was never convinced defensively, Martin. They had Henshaw and Hupea, and I never really liked. I just felt you could get at them. I didn't think it was a title-winning defence, because when you looked at the middle to front, you thought that's a serious side. But I don't know what. Am I being harsh? I just never really took to those two as a.
I don't like Henshaw. I quite liked Hupea, to be honest. I thought he was fine, but again, another defender who needs a certain kind of defender beside him, and the two certainly didn't work. Adam, the debutants for this new form of the tournament, of course, we are 3 seasons away from Istanbul and all of that, with a new manager, of course, because Benitez will be there. Is there any signs, any roots here in Houlier's work and who he's assembled that lead us there, or is it just names, the same kind of names? Obviously, Gerrard now, by the summer of 2001, I mean, he got brought on in Euro 2000 as a kid, really, and now he is, my word, this boy is going to be one of the most dynamic midfielders of the next 10 years. Allied to some of that experience, Lippmann is still kicking about, Gary Mack's still there. Milan Baros comes in this summer, which made sense. Jonan Narisa coming in, who did well for them, but they're also getting rid of. I mean, Robbie Fowler goes, this year midway through, which is massive for Liverpool to be kind of shedding that. Owen is a different kind of goal scorer from when he literally ran on the scene, because he was all pace and he had that injury and he's had to maybe adapt a wee bit more. Well, where are they again, and compared with where they're going to be in only 3 years?
So I didn't like them, if I'm honest. Not that I didn't like them as in I hated the club or anything like that. I don't know. I enjoyed Gerrard, I enjoyed Owen. I like John Arnorisa. I'm the same as David. I couldn't get on board with the defence. It never really thrilled me. I hated the kind of Danny Murphy out wide or things like that. And I'm just like, it was, to me, it was very similar setup wise to what England were trying to do around about this time, and I wasn't particularly enthused with that either. Yeah, and it probably goes further into Istanbul. Benitez, it's just not the type of football I enjoy, or the type of setups that I enjoy. So it probably permeated into it. I definitely think you can see bits. Houllier and Benitez aren't that dissimilar, to be honest. I don't think, in terms of setup, demeanor, whatever else you wanna throw at it. So you can definitely see some of the precursors there in terms of solid defensive shape at times, but not not really feeling like they've got good individual defenders. Bit weird to say. Didn't really like Heskey at Liverpool. I didn't really feel like that was one for me. I felt like that was you're great in a kind of smaller team, and you should kind of stay at that level almost. And Elka coming in piqued my interest a little bit. He was in for 6 months. He had a pretty good 6 months. But I don't know. It never really captured my imagination or captivated me in the way that Arsenal did, or even United had a couple of years before. It was very functional with a couple of top quality players in there, and it would really probably be until much later when you've got Torres, Suarez coming in that I'm really starting to see them as more exciting and maybe more interesting in that sense. So yeah, there's not going to be lots of gushing over Liverpool over the next couple of years. Obviously, aside from that incredible comeback that we'll come on to, but yeah, I thought they were good, decent quality at times, but yeah, just lacking a bit for me.
Yeah, not to preempt future episodes in this 3-part series, but United were due to face the winners of Liverpool and Bayer Leverkusen quarter-final in the semi, and I know for a fact that Rob Smythe was terrified of Liverpool snatching that. They were just
really?
on they had a bit of, I think they had a hold over United in a certain way, maybe in a kind of cup way. They just,
I guess there's that context you mentioned as well, that before Christmas for United, I think they were ninth in mid-December, five losses and 7 or something at that point. So I guess that probably was a factor in it as well. Liverpool coming off the back of that brilliant season, weird season when they won all the cups, like you said. But I guess it makes sense. It's quite funny thinking back at it now, I guess, in terms of how the rest of that decade would go for United and Liverpool domestically.
Yeah, you mentioned Arsenal. They go through again, but not overly convincingly in Group C. They go ahead of Real Mallorca again, another team I think we're seeing for the first time. They go to the FA Cup, and Schalke 04 at the very bottom. But top of the group again, David. These fucking Greeks, Panathinaikos, win 12 points. Vlahovic and Basinas and Constantino, all these names still kicking about, still doing a job. And I guess we're only 2 seasons or 2 years at the end of this from Euro 2004. With hindsight, we should not be surprised about what's coming up internationally quite quickly, because they have something about them. They will only go out of this tournament in kind of dramatic fashion. They are absolutely resolute.
Yeah, and how quickly we forget. It's almost like, if you said to me at the start, well, Greek football has a quite impressive period here, I would have said, no, I don't think so. So it was almost like this happened every year and just none of us took any notice of it. It wasn't like the clubs got raided either, was it? It wasn't like,
No.
the top 5 leagues went in and said, right, here, there must be something going on here because these clubs keep making...
Not until after the...
Not until after 2004.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's such an anomaly in the modern game, even in this era, that a league could consistently throw up a club or clubs who go in and perform at this level, and we don't hear about it. And you contrast it even, Martin and Adam, with remember Rosenborg in the 90s?
Mm-hmm.
We all took note of that. It's such a strange thing, but it had completely not entered my. I was going to say it slipped my mind. It hadn't, because I don't think it had ever gone in how strong they were. Look at that group, and yes, you're right. Arsenal weren't fantastic during
They're
a
going for a
real
title,
sluggish.
right? They maybe got other
Yeah.
things on. And again, I go
Other
back to this
things.
thing: seeds, top seeds. You're now in this
They know they're
first
good for it.
group. Does this really not? Do we really care? We'll get through. The business starts, after Christmas, kind of thing. Maybe read too much into some of these bigger sides, maybe ending up second. But and it's
Funny
not.
you mentioned that. Sorry to interrupt, but it's funny you mentioned that because you've said before a couple of times on here it's that second group stage in your memory was rubbish. Maybe it was just the fact that there were two group stages and the first one became a precursor or a pre-qualifying.
Well, I've
that
definitely
probably,
changed my mind on group stage 2.
yeah.
There's more fun to be had again next week. But yeah, Arsenal just kind of treading water a little bit. But yeah, you're right. I don't know, Davey. I just don't know why we didn't see this. No one was talking about exactly the Rosenborg. The Rosenborg thing is a good example.
And they got harvested.
Absolutely, and I don't know. USA 94 Greece were so bad. I mean, utterly dreadful. I don't know if that just stunk the memory out for 10 years or whatever. This is a flash in the pan, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. The next group I want to have a look at, Group D. Galatasaray still kicking about. Adam still doing well. They go up in second place. PSV third, and they go to the UEFA Cup. It's the two sides at either end I want to have a look at. Not win the group. I'm looking through the squad now. A certain Eric Jemba jumping out.
Verón Moldovan.
There's not, we have picked up on French sides before, and you can see, look who they have. You know what's coming next. You know the kind of careers that are just about to kind of take shape. This really is in and of itself. This seems the story.
It's weird because I vividly remember looking forward to the Patrice Loco year before we did it and thinking, oh, that's really burned in my memory. But to be honest, if you'd asked me then without looking up, I'd have said that was their only time in the competition. I think this is the third time they're back, and the third time they're back in 10 years, and it's
not resonating.
Weird. Yeah, it's probably similar to Panathinaikos. It's just not quite getting into your head. Verón Moldovan was there. Mikel Landreau, who was he at Man United, or was he linked to Man United at some point? I feel like he was there as a backup keeper. Maybe that's a Football Manager / real life thing. Merging into one. They had a couple of interesting players. Yeah, like this is obviously the time now. Leon win. And go on to win throughout the noughties. So I guess every other French team sort of falls by the wayside a little bit. I think for this next 10 years or so, we've got PSG playing in the UEFA Cups. Obviously, we'll come to as well. So they're in here, but they're not particularly memorable. They're a pot 4 team as well, I think, along with Panathinaikos. So you think Panathinaikos come in as pot 4 and managed to get through, and Nantes coming in at pot 4 and getting through in first as well. It really does show. It does show what you're saying there. Maybe some of the bigger teams were either not taking it seriously and just doing enough to get through, or thinking they didn't need to take it seriously and getting punted out. I'm looking at maybe 2 of the other teams in this group with Eindhoven and Lazio.
Lazio, Davey, rock bottom, not happening. Bit of an explosion again. They lost Ericsson before. He's in England now. These things happen. What I want to talk to you about, they made a signing. They lost Verón, huge player, of course, but they bring in the player that we were gushing over last time. We've been gushing over for weeks now. Gaisca Mendieta, one of the best midfielders in the world, and he's joining up with Claudio Lopez as well. This seems to make perfect sense, and it just doesn't work. On paper, it is just ideal. This guy can play anywhere, and it's a reminder at any level, as we bemoan recruitment and get frustrated at recruitment, it's fucking hard when some of the best clubs in the world can pick some of the best players in the world, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, look at some of the names in their squad. Marco Gianni, Dino Baggio, Stankovic, Mendieta, Lopez, Poborski, Crespo, Mihailovic, Nesta, Simeone. This is incredible stuff.
Stam.
And Stam was brought in. They changed manager early doors. Dino's off. Who, even at this, must have been a good age. Because he was 40 in 82, so maybe in his 60s. He goes, and you think, right, okay, well, let's see where they go. But he goes really early, which I suppose we're used to now, but back then, not so much. Zaccheroni comes in, and they remind me a lot, Martin, of David Murray, sort of, that period post-Advocat when things, not post-Advocat, but when things started to go wrong under Advocat, and we bought Flo and we bought, De Boer and stuff, where I will lash money at this in the hope that it turns it round. And that's what they do right now. But a bit like us, it's not done with any care. It's, I will sign good players because clearly good players coming in will make us better. And it doesn't work like that. Mendieta was, in my opinion, the best midfielder in Europe playing that system, where he had guys round him who would work to his strengths. And they've just put him into a totally alien style of football, to a totally different system. The manager who signs him, although I know it's, in Italy, quite often the chairman, goes after a few weeks. He struggles, of course he does. It's hard to imagine that he wouldn't. Stam, what a signing. He's going to be brilliant. It can't fail. But yet it doesn't really work out, because there is this sense now of whatever wave they were on has crested. They're now on the downside and they're fighting desperately to do it. But it's all swing for the fences stuff. There's no build. There's no we'll go away, which is going to be impossible under a guy like Cragnotti because he's mental.
Well, this is it. That's it. Adam, the house has fallen down. It doesn't matter how big your TV is. I mean, is that not it? It's masking some deeper malaise at the club, and again, even players this good don't fix wider structural problems that maybe you can't see at that time. Maybe you do know about. These things only become visible at certain points. It's just not as simple as, oh, we've lost that player, but that player's brilliant. Will be better.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's obviously a combination of things. You would like to think that guys come in, Mendieta and Jaap Stam can come into any team in the world and adapt, but it just shows you even at that level, and the age that Jaap Stam was, 31, 32, coming in to a slower league that you might think would suit him if he's losing a little bit of pace.
I thought he would be perfect for it.
It just doesn't happen. Just silly decisions. Like, I mean, okay, you bring in Mendieta, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't change the fact that you've swapped Marcelo Salas for Darko Kovacevic. It's just just daft things that are happening. And like you said, who knows what's going on in the background. Nedved out as well this summer as well. So you've got Poborski there as the main threat, which is fine, but it's not Pavel Nedved. And yeah, just a bit weird. One thing that I was thinking when I was watching back and looking at a few things here is, obviously Verón went out to Man United and Mendieta came in. Mendieta to Man United would have been
that was a signing,
ridiculously perfect signing.
Yeah, but Ferguson loved Verón, right? He was one of his crushes. Here's another thing about this Lazio. The other side of that, well, I've signed you good players, is you've brought in Zaccheroni, a guy who's happy to get the job, right? And isn't seen by the fan base at that point as somebody who's going to be there for a number of seasons, right? So he's kind of auditioning for the role. He might want to play a certain way, which would involve picking certain players, but he's not going to be allowed to because Cragnotti is going to say, I don't give a toss what you want to do with your systems or whatever. You are not picking player X ahead of Jaap Stam or Mendieta because I have signed these guys and they are going to play. So there's so many inhibiting factors all around even a coach. You know, you change the coach, but you're not allowing him. He can't go in a way that a manager, a highly sought, like when Mourinho walked into Chelsea, right? You know, you are the man. We will allow you to go. You know, he doesn't have that. So what you get is this mishmash squad, as Adam said, where guys have been signed to replace players, but they're not like for like signings. They're good players, but they're not the guy who's left. Verón and Mendieta are two totally different types of players. And it is Football Manager. It is the idea, because it's a guy, Cragnotti, who is signing these players. He's going, who's the hottest player in the world right now? We'll sign him. It's a little bit like why the Galacticos maybe didn't win as much as, you know, on paper they should have when you looked at the squad. And I just think this Lazio side were so much at the end of a cycle and fighting desperately against it, but there were so many hurdles they were putting in their own path, and it comes to fruition here because it's a ruthless testing ground.
I think as well, it's something that's just sort of hit me there as you were talking. You bring in Zaccheroni, who is an ideologue. He's that AC Milan was 3-4-3. Let's play 3-4-3. Okay, that's fine. Stam hasn't played 3 at the back for ever. You're then talking about, okay, we'll look at all these central midfielders that we've got. Do we have even wingers? Really? We had wide midfielders, so do we have wingers there? No, we've got loads of strikers, but we're only going to play one of them now.
And they're all central strikers. You can play 3 up front.
Our central midfielders, Mendieta coming in as a wide player. Is there really room for him as well as a Paborski? Yeah, it's so bit misbalanced. And again, as well, you're looking at the lineups and appearances and stuff. Sinisa Mihailovic and Diego Simeone do not play a lot this year, which I think that was something we said a while back. I can't remember what year it was, but there was a hell of a lot of injuries. I think it might have been Lazio a couple of years back in this. There was just so many injuries that has to have an impact as well on top of all this stuff. So yeah, just poor management, poor decisions, poor hiring, poor financial decisions, all culminating. And it's funny how it just comes crashing down for them within a year, really.
A year, yeah.
Interesting point you make. It's correct, Adam. Mendieta is the signing that United should have made.
Definitely.
But they couldn't make it, even if they wanted to. And it's a signal of, again, just where English football isn't quite yet the biggest club in England, one of the biggest clubs in the world, probably couldn't do that deal, that the Serie A still has that pool for now. And it's obviously going to come to an end kind of fairly soon. Okay, the next group, Juve, you've mentioned, Adam, starting to get their shit together again. They win the group. Porto second, not yet. Jose Mourinho Porto, he will join at the end of this season and do quite a fair bit in 2 years. We should make mention of Celtic. They, again, showing for the first time, beating Ajax in that playoff round. It's a funny one, David. They win 3 home games, they lose 3 away games. 9 points is, usually decent chance of going through. They don't. When he loses his shit, and absolutely phenomenal, or whatever it was, magnificently brilliant, or whatever the 2 words he crammed together. When he felt
astonishingly brilliant.
Astonishingly brilliant. They were dodgily treated in Turin. I'll be honest. This was difficult. This was a difficult watch for me, coming after Celtic winning a treble, something that's just unheard of for someone of my age. We can't even make it, and there's a naivety, there's a ruggedness. Obviously, they're a rugby team with a world-class forward. They could get football stopped, but it's very effective at home. The harem scarum thing, you could imagine that those nights are a joy to be part of, and they're going away and giving it a good bloody go. It's just a bit naive at times. Your recollections of that and your thoughts now?
Recollections at the time, probably not sensible to air. I was like you, I was deeply unimpressed by the turn that this had taken. The Ajax result, unfortunately, is a very good one. They go there and win 3-1. They lose the home leg, but it doesn't matter. The 3 away goals, they're going through. And in the group stage at home, their fans did create an incredible atmosphere. So much so that I think this couple of years, and then maybe the first under Strachan, mythologised in Scottish football that Parkhead was an incredible place, and then now it's not. It really isn't. You know, in European,
it's very hard. For them to play.
And I think it really took our runs in the late 2010s, you know, and obviously Seville, to sort of make people step away from the cliche. But at this point at home, they were formidable. They were playing a style that was a 90s style. It was Martin O'Neill's Leicester style. It was a 3-5-2 with lightning quick wide players to give them that pace. They had guys in Lennon and Thompson that could hit a very good dead ball, and they played for fouls, Sutton and Larson, because then when the ball went into the box, they had the three giants at the back. They had Hartson, Sutton, Larson, who were all very, very good in the air. And it worked for them at home because they overpowered their opponents. When they went away from home and it became a more technical match, then they struggled because they, with the exception of, as you say, the guy up front and Petrov, they didn't have those technical players. And the defence wasn't great against smaller
pace and movement, which is what we found with McLeish.
Which is what McLeish does when he comes in, absolutely. And we go to the three, and he's got Caniggia, Lovenkrands, and we suddenly start to get joy against them because they struggled badly with that. But yeah, I mean, they achieved some fantastic results this year, and it was incredibly painful to witness. Then, of course, you know, the following year they have the run to Seville as well. But it was that confidence of, as I think we found, you know, in recent years in Europe, of, well, we'll take anybody at home.
Yeah,
that gets you quite a distance. 9 points under normal circumstances gets you through that group. They are unfortunate there, but I suppose that's why the cliche is win your home games and get a point away,
and play differently away, because it's a different.
They don't exactly. They play that, and it is a limited way of playing. And I think that when Rangers, as we demonstrate by winning 5 trophies in a row, when Rangers actually go away and say, right, okay, well, what will we do to combat this? And as you say, we suddenly start moving the ball very quickly, playing with pace and wide men, tricky, smaller players. They struggled against that. But they shocked teams. They would go to Parkhead and it would be a frenzy, and the physicality that they did get away with at home in a way that I don't think that you would now, you know, no matter. A referee would clamp down on it, but back then at home things were allowed, and it took teams by surprise. But I can say that now, all these years later, but at the time I was just, you know, raging at the world for allowing this to happen.
I think you're absolutely right, David. That myth was born there, or that something was born there that actually affected teams who visited, and they didn't play their normal way until they kind of got over that and pretty quickly nailed them. Anyway, they did not make it through, thankfully. The other group we haven't talked about then, Adam, features Fenerbahce, who beat us and got 0 points. So that kind of shows you where Rangers are in the pecking order of European football at the moment in time. Lyon, again, another team with 9 points who don't make it through. They go to the UEFA Cup. Barcelona looking very good indeed, very impressive. But we'll talk about them, I think, a wee bit later on in the series. Let's talk about Bayer Leverkusen then, who are here and ready to go. How are they kind of set
qualifiers? Had to come through the group stage. The playoff.
What's Bayer like?
Quite interesting. I think, like David said, they had to come through the qualifiers for this one. This is when they've got Michael Ballack, obviously, at their peak, as we'll come on and speak about. They are, I would say, sort of typically German at this time. German national team is certainly not where it would go on to be. Famously, Das Reboot etc., was based on that Euro 2000, wasn't it? That or not based on it, but it came after that in terms of what they needed to do.
They said they get to a World Cup final at the end of this season. So I mean,
I know.
if that's your, I know what you mean though, because the Euro 2000 was utterly appalling. There's longer term work to be done. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's that whole academy restructure, all that sort of stuff that they're putting in, and then you start to see 10 years later Neuer and Kroos and Müller and all those guys coming through. They're interesting. Diego Placente, an Argentinian, that always seems to stick in my mind, as well as somebody that I quite enjoyed. He was a very good left back for them. Hans-Jörg Butt was there. Lucio was there as well. This is where he started his European career. Quite a bit of time here. To be honest, people might not remember him from there, but he was here for a few years before he went to Bayern, and obviously on to Serie A. Just a terrific 2000s defender. Kind of one of those guys perfect for Italian football, I think, at the time. Mentioned Michael Ballack, Yildirim Bastard, I mentioned earlier on as well. Just a really nice number 10 in there. Oliver Neuville up top, which was, I guess, one of those players I was maybe liking to, kind of like a Christophe Dugarry type player, like a support striker that maybe should be playing off of a striker, but in this one he wasn't. He quite an interesting setup. We'll probably maybe go into it more in the final, but it was almost like a 3-5-1-1. This one, I would say it wasn't. There was no wingers at all. It was essentially 5 central midfielders, if you want to call it that. You've got Bastard playing as the 10, Michael Ballack, Vidaric and Schneider as the 3 in the middle, Carsten Ramelow, another great 2000s central midfield name. They were functional. I was very surprised they got as far as they got, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But I think in Michael Ballack, they had somebody in there who it was just very obvious it was a breakout season for him. He was an absolute star of this, and then obviously would go on to great success at Bayern as well. So one of those ones that a team just appears and they've got a ready-made star there who's going to be a household name for the rest of the decade, essentially.
I loved him.
I loved him.
He had that German arrogant striding about a pitch like he owned it thing that I love. He was such an elegant player, and the fact that he went to England and he could still play the game at his pace, I think, is always a sign of a good player. Obviously, it all came from watching Barry in '98.
Of course.
I love Roberto. He was a great player as well. A young Dimitar Berbatov as well, kicking about that
with his lovely touch.
Yeah. They will be the short team. One more thought, Adam. I think it's percolating there.
What I was going to say is just interesting with Ballack, and I guess this is something that we don't see now, and it sort of hit me when we were looking at Jaap Stam's transfer to Lazio as well. Like, Michael Ballack is 25, 26 here, and he's having his kind of breakout. Like, that just doesn't happen anymore. Like, you look at Bellingham just as the example that shines in my head, and the breakout seasons for these guys are 18 now. Jaap Stam was the one that I had to double check. He went to Man United when he was in his late 20s, like 27, and you're like, that just seems, what are you doing in Holland for 5 or 6 years before that? It's just not happening anymore. And I guess it's not great because we don't get these club sides appearing now. If they do, they get broken up very, very quickly. But there's no chance your Michael Ballacks and your Jaap Stams are playing in their domestic leagues until that age without having serious interest or without anybody really knowing who they are. If you like Ballack never got a cap for Germany until he was 23, 24 at this stage of that just now. He'd be getting capped when he was about 12 probably for the German national team. So there's no hiding place anymore, but it's funny how these players you just assume they've been great players since they were born, but really Ballack's, like I said, 20, 25, almost 26 before he's having.
Do you know what I think is one of the reasons, or one of the times where I began to think, this is now a thing, and I think it has sped up because, as we mentioned, even on this show, everybody in football copies everybody. Arsenal and Cesc Fabregas and Nicolas Anelka, when Wenger started going round, youth leagues and say, I'll just take these guys, and clubs were like, what? This isn't sporting. It wasn't.
PK went early, didn't he?
PK, yeah, a great example, yeah. And now, of course, they all do it, and they're signing kids or get their eyes on kids from 8 years old and stuff. But back then, it was such a revelation that you would go to another club's youth team, and particularly abroad, and sign a guy, and then it became that everybody has to watch everybody to be aware. And I think you're absolutely right. The idea now that Ballack could have been allowed to develop slowly, it would not happen because people would pick up on his potential at least, and he'd be signed by a big club 18-19.
Just to circle that off, I know Ballack is going to feature quite heavily over the next couple of weeks, and he's a huge player for Bayer. But that outlier internationally, with Germany getting to that final and Japan and Korea, I know there's a whole host of issues with that particular World Cup and teams that probably should have gone further and didn't for dubious reasons, but it's not a great Germany team. He drags them to that final and suspended. He can't play in the final, but still I think scores the goal in the semi-final that gets them there, even though he knew he was suspended, had that booking. He was just such a monumental individual force at driving still good teams, but in the context of the wider tournament and the wider kind of competition, lesser. I think it's probably fair to say he just carried himself. But you're right, he carries himself like a guy in his mid-20s, and we would expect that now. And it's what makes guys like Bellingham so freakish, is that they're carrying themselves like a 28-year-old when they're 18, and it's that kind of presence that that he had, and it'll be good to remember that, not just over this season, but some of the others to come. Gents, this really is one of the favourite shows to do. Every single week there's something I've forgotten, and it's nice to just to pick up again the remnants of my memory. Thank you, David.
Thank you, guys. I'm the same, and actually learned something, because, as I say, I'm not sure Panathinaikos had actually gone into my brain. I've been very, very good, but we've talked about them as semi-finalists. They are again top group. So yeah, even as a panelist, I learn on this show.
Mainly to Adam. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, no worries. Like I said, it is really interesting just going back and things that you think have happened, and in a way that you think they happened, and you go back and say, well, actually, and it's not even just individual games, or remember this team got really close, or this team went out on away goals. It's things that you just wouldn't have thought about, like Nantes coming back 3 and 4 times. Are they going to pop up again? I don't even know if they're going to pop up again in the next couple of years, off the top of my head, but it'd be interesting to see. It's like just a repeating dream for them. So yeah, no, it's been really interesting again, this one. And you're looking forward to digging into those second round group stages, and then obviously the final, and what I think is the best Champions League goal.
Yeah. Okay, next week we do pick up again the wonder of the second group phase. Some amazing quarterfinals. Real and Bayern do their thing, and a lot more besides. Until next time, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts and breakdowns dropping every other day.